Part 1.
You will hear a conversation between a client and a flight centre agent about making changes to an airline booking. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5. Good morning, Mrs. Gray. This is Bert Stock speaking from Finnegan's Flight Centre. I can now confirm your flight to Singapore.
Oh, good. No problems, I hope.
No, everything is in order.
So we got the dates we wanted?
Yes, leaving from Hong Kong on the 25th of July and arriving in Singapore later the same day.
How long does the flight last?
Oh, about 3 hours 40 minutes.
So we'd get there at...
9:45.
In the evening?
No, 9:45 a.m.
But that means we'd be leaving at...
Your flight leaves Hong Kong at 6:05 a.m.
So we'd have to check in an hour before that?
Mrs. Gray, check-in closes 60 minutes before your scheduled departure. If you arrive after check-in has closed, you will not be able to board the flight, and you may forfeit your entire fare. I would strongly recommend that you arrive at the check-in counter at least 120 minutes before your departure time.
So you're saying we should be at the airport no later than 4:05 a.m.?
That's correct.
But we'd have to get up in the middle of the night to arrive by that time. Can't we get a later flight?
Not on July 25th. Now, there is a later flight on certain weekdays, but not at the weekend.
Well, we must go with what we've got then, because we're not at all flexible on the dates because of work commitments.
Can I confirm that you want to return on August 7th?
Yes, that's the idea.
Flight VQ239 will depart from Singapore at 9:20 a.m. on August 7th.
Oh, that's a much more civilized time. Tell me, the time zone is the same, isn't it? We don't gain or lose an hour along the way.
There's no change in the time zone, so you can expect to be back at around 1 p.m. Does that suit you?
Oh, absolutely. I'll have time to unpack before dinner. We're expecting to meet friends at the new seafood restaurant at 8 o'clock.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Mrs. Gray, I'll send you all these details by an email or letter of confirmation. Which do you prefer?
Well, email is faster, but we've been having difficulties with our internet connection. So, if you could post it out, I'd appreciate that.
Now, just one or two other things to check before final confirmation. You're booked on a life-flight ticket.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, you'll only have carry-on baggage. Is that right?
Oh, yes, that was the original idea. It's so much quicker not having to wait around at the luggage carousel, but...
Yes?
Can you remind me of the allowance again?
With a life-flight ticket, you're allowed 10 kilos of hand baggage.
I'm not sure that's such a good idea now.
Oh?
Well, apparently we're going to have to attend quite a few formal functions while we're away, so I think I'm going to need a real suitcase to fit the extra clothes and shoes in.
Well, that's not a problem. I can upgrade you to the next level and change your ticket to Easy Flight. There will be an extra charge, of course.
How much?
$30 per checked-in item of luggage, weighing no more than 22 kilos per item.
Well, we'll probably manage with just a single suitcase between the two of us. Is it possible to do it like that?
Yes, of course. You can take the Easy Flight option, and your husband can stay with the Light Flight ticket.
Great.
I'll give you your reservation number now. So if you need to make any further changes or inquiries, you can just quote this reference, okay?
Yes, I have a pen and paper. What is it?
L4G BWF.
L4G BUF?
WF.
Thanks, I've got it now.
At this point, I can actually book your seat numbers. Do you have any preference? Window or aisle?
Oh, not by the window, Bert. You see, I'm quite a nervous flyer, and I don't like looking out. What's more, my husband likes a bit of room to stretch his legs. Aisle would be good.
Great. That's sorted then. As I said, I'll send you the details, and if you need to talk to the agency again, just quote that reference number I gave you.
Thanks so much. Bye.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2.
First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15.
The first thing is that clean energy has been increasing. This is electricity from clean energy sources over the last 20 years. But when you look at the percentage of global electricity from clean energy sources, it's actually been in decline from 36% to 31%. And if you care about climate change, you got to go in the opposite direction to 100% of our electricity from clean energy sources as quickly as possible. Now, you might wonder, come on, how much could 5 percentage points of global electricity be? Well, it turns out to be quite a bit. It's the equivalent of 60 nuclear plants the size of Diablo Canyon, California's last nuclear plant, or 900 solar farms the size of Topaz, which is one of the biggest solar farms in the world and certainly our biggest in California. Well, a big part of this is just simply that fossil fuels are increasing faster than clean energy. And that's understandable. There's just a lot of poor countries that are still using wood and charcoal as their main source of energy, and they need modern fuels. But there's something else going on, which is that one of those clean energy sources in particular has actually been on the decline in absolute terms, not just relatively, and that's nuclear. You can see its generation has declined 7% over the last 10 years. Now, solar and wind have been making huge strides, and so you hear a lot of talk about how it doesn't really matter because solar and wind is going to make up the difference. But the data says something different. When you combine all the electricity from solar and wind, you see it actually barely makes up half of the decline from nuclear. Well, let's take a closer look in the United States. Over the last couple of years, really 2013, 2014, we prematurely retired 4 nuclear power plants. They were almost entirely replaced with fossil fuels. And so the consequence was that we wiped out almost as much clean energy electricity that we get from solar. And it's not unique to us. I mean, people think of California as a clean energy and climate leader, but when we looked at the data, what we found is that, in fact, California reduced emissions more slowly than the national average between 2000 and 2015. What about Germany? They're doing a lot of clean energy. But when you look at the data, German emissions have actually been going up since 2009, and there's really not anybody who's going to tell you that they're going to meet their climate commitments in 2020. The reason isn't hard to understand. Solar and wind provide power about 10 to 20% of the time, which means that when the sun's not shining, the wind's not blowing, you still need power for your hospitals, your homes, your cities, your factories. And while batteries have made some really cool improvements lately, the truth is that they're just never going to be as efficient as the electrical grid. Every time you put electricity into a battery and you take it out, you lose about 20 to 40% of the power. That's why when in California we try to deal with all the solar we've brought online, we now get about 10% of our electricity from solar.
You have some time to look at questions 16 to 20.
When the sun goes down and people come home from work and turn on their air conditioners and their TV sets and every other appliance in the house, we need a lot of natural gas backup. So what we've been doing is stuffing a lot of natural gas into the side of a mountain. And that worked pretty well for a while, but then late last year it sprung a leak. This is Aliso Canyon, and so much methane gas was released, it was the equivalent of putting 500,000 cars on the road. It basically blew through all of our climate commitments for the year. Well, what about India? Sometimes you have to go places to really get the right data. So we traveled to India a few months ago. We met with all the top officials, solar, nuclear, the rest. And what they told us is they said, we're actually having more serious problems than both Germany and California. We don't have backup. We started it. We say we want to get to 100 gigawatts by 2022, but last year we did just 5, and the year before that we did 5. So let's just take a closer look at nuclear. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has looked at the carbon content of all these different fuels, and nuclear comes out really low. It's actually lower even than solar. And nuclear obviously provides a lot of power. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. During a year, a single plant can provide power 92% of the time. And what's interesting is that when you look at countries that have deployed different kinds of clean energies, there's only a few that have done so at a pace consistent with dealing with the climate crisis. So nuclear seems like a pretty good option, but there's this big problem with it, which all of you, I'm sure, are aware of, which is that people really don't like it. There was a survey done of people around the world, not just in the United States or Europe, about a year and a half ago, and what they found is that nuclear is actually one of the least popular forms of energy. Even oil is more popular than nuclear. And while nuclear kind of edges out coal, the thing is people don't really fear coal in the same way that they feared nuclear, which really operates on our unconscious. So what is it that we fear? I mean, there's really 3 things. There's the safety of the plants themselves, the fears that they're going to melt down and cause damage. There's the waste from them. And then there's the association with weapons. And I think, understandably, engineers look at those concerns and they want to look for technological fixes. I mean, that's why Bill Gates is in China developing advanced reactors. That's why 40 different entrepreneurs are working on this problem. And I myself have been very excited about it. We did a report, How to Make Nuclear Cheap. In particular, the thorium reactor shows a lot of promise. And so when the climate scientist James Hansen asked if I wanted to go to China with him and look at the Chinese advanced nuclear program, I jumped at the chance. We were there with MIT and UC Berkeley engineers. And, I had in my mind that the Chinese would be able to do with nuclear what they did with so many other things. Just start to crank out small nuclear reactors on assembly lines. We could ship them up like iPhones or MacBooks and send them around the world. I would get one home in Berkeley. But what I found was somewhat different. The presentations were all very exciting and very promising. They have multiple reactors that they're working on. The time came for the thorium reactor, and a bunch of us were excited. They went through the whole presentation, they got to the timeline, and they said, we're going to have a thorium molten salt reactor ready for sale to the world by 2040.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3.
You will hear a conversation between a tutor and two students in the Political Studies Department of a New Zealand tertiary institution. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Good morning. Now, you've come to discuss how our Parliament works. Is that right?
Yes, it's a bit different from some of the other democracies we've studied, and we're a bit confused.
Well, what do you know?
We know that the system of government in New Zealand is a constitutional monarchy, but we're not sure how the power is shared or who has ultimate authority.
The government is formed from a democratically elected House of Representatives. Is that the same as Parliament? Yes, the House of Representatives is what is commonly called Parliament.
And the government advises the sovereign, who is our head of state.
The sovereign is the Queen of England, right? She lives in England and she is the Queen of England, but when we refer to her as our sovereign, we say she is Queen Elizabeth II of New Zealand. But how can she be our head of state if she doesn't live here?
I know that she has a representative here.
Oh yes, the Governor-General. That's right. Now, by convention, the sovereign is the source of all executive legal authority in New Zealand.
So she's the boss.
Well, you could say that. However, she or her representative almost always acts on the advice of the government. In all but the most exceptional circumstances, that is.
So, where does the real power lie?
Good question. Our system is based on the principle that power is distributed across three branches of government: the Parliament, the Executive, and the Judiciary.
But Parliament makes the law, doesn't it?
That's right. So what's the point of the other two? Well, you need a body to administer the law. That's the Executive, made up of ministers of the Crown, and the Judiciary interprets the law through the courts. Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30.
When I'm watching American legal programs on TV, I always hear people talking about the Constitution and how something is unconstitutional. What exactly is a constitution?
It's a document outlining the basic laws or principles by which a country is governed.
Do we have one?
No. This would actually make a good topic for next semester's debate. There's quite a bit of controversy over that particular issue. New Zealand has no single written constitution or any form of law that is higher than the laws passed in Parliament.
OK, I think I've got that. The rules about how our system of government works are all contained in the laws that have been passed by Parliament?
Those laws are called Acts of Parliament, but there are also other documents issued under the authority of the Queen and some relevant UK Acts of Parliament. Really? But it's all written down, right? Not exactly. There are several unwritten constitutional conventions as well.
I can see why this would make a good topic for debate.
Altogether, though, our system is quite simple because our Parliament is unicameral. What does that mean? It means there is just one chamber, the House of Representatives, and there is no upper house.
I see. By upper house you mean a second house, like a Senate?
In the American model, yes, but the British have a House of Lords as their upper house, don't they? Yes, but the Lords don't have to be elected.
But we have elections every 3 years to elect our people's representatives.
Yes, And the electoral system is called proportional representation. A lot of democracies have quite different voting systems.
Why is ours called MMP?
That stands for Mixed Member Proportional Representation. So that's why each elector has 2 votes. Exactly. One for a local member of parliament for the particular electoral district you live in, and one for a preferred political party. So that's where the proportional part of it comes in. Political parties are represented in Parliament in proportion to the share of votes each party has won in the party vote in the general election. Any more questions? No, not at this stage. Thank you for your time today. Okay. See you in class tomorrow. Bye.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4. First, you have some time to look at questions.
But the question is why? Why do we sometimes fail to perform up to our potential under pressure? It's especially bewildering in the case of athletes who spend so much time physically honing their craft. But what about their minds? Not as much. This is true off the playing field as well. Whether we're taking a test or giving a talk, it's easy to feel like we're ready at the top of our game and then perform at our worst when it matters most. It turns out that rarely do we practice under the types of conditions we're actually going to perform under. And as a result, when all eyes are on us, we sometimes flub our performance. Of course, the question is, why is this the case? And my experience on the playing field and in other important facets of my life really pushed me into the field of cognitive science. I wanted to know how we could reach our limitless potential. I wanted to understand how we could use our knowledge of the mind and the brain to come up with psychological tools that would help us perform at our best. So why does it happen? Why do we sometimes fail to perform up to what we're capable of when the pressure is on? It may not be so surprising to hear that in stressful situations, we worry. We worry about the situation, the consequences, what others will think of us. But what is surprising is that we often get in our own way, precisely because our worries prompt us to concentrate too much. That's right, we pay too much attention to what we're doing. When we're concerned about performing our best, we often try and control aspects of what we're doing that are best left on autopilot, outside conscious awareness, and as a result, we mess up. Think about a situation where you're shuffling down the stairs, and what would happen if I asked you to think about what you're doing with your knee while you're doing that? There's a good chance you'd fall on your face. We as humans only have the ability to pay attention to so much at once, which is why, by the way, it's not a good idea to drive and talk on the cell phone. And under pressure, when we're concerned about performing at our best, we can try and control aspects of what we're doing that should be left outside conscious control. The end result is that we mess up. My research team and I have studied this phenomenon of overattention, and we call it paralysis by analysis. In one study, we asked college soccer players to dribble a soccer ball and to pay attention to an aspect of their performance that they would not otherwise attend to. We asked them to pay attention to what side of the foot was contacting the ball. We showed that performance was slower and more error-prone when we drew their attention to the step-by-step details of what they were doing. When the pressure is on, we're often concerned with performing at our best, and as a result, we try and control what we're doing to force the best performance. The end result is that we actually screw up. In basketball, the term unconscious is used to describe a shooter who can't miss. And San Antonio Spurs star Tim Duncan has said, "When you have to stop and think, that's when you mess up." In dance, the great choreographer George Balanchine used to urge his dancers, "Don't think, just do." When the pressure's on, when we want to put our best foot forward, somewhat ironically, we often try and control what we're doing in a way that leads to worse performance. So what do we do? Knowing that we have this overactive attention, how do we ensure that we perform at our best? A lot of it comes down to the prefrontal cortex, that front part of our brain that sits over our eyes and usually helps us focus in positive ways. It often gets hooked on the wrong things. So how do we unhook it? Something as simple as singing a song or paying attention to one's pinky toe, as pro golfer Jack Nicklaus was rumored to do, can help us take our mind off those pesky details. It's also true that practicing under conditions that we're going to perform under, closing the gap between training and competition, can help us get used to that feeling of all eyes on us. This is true off the playing field as well. Whether it's getting ready for an exam or preparing for a big talk, one that might have a little pressure associated with it, getting used to the types of situations you're going to perform under really matters. When you're taking a test, close the book. Practice retrieving the answer from memory under timed situations. And when you're giving a talk, practice in front of others. And if you can't find anyone who will listen, practice in front of a video camera or even a mirror. The ability to get used to what it will feel like can make the difference in whether we choke or thrive. We've also figured out some ways to get rid of those pesky worries and self-doubts that tend to creep up in the stressful situations. Researchers have shown that simply jotting down your thoughts and worries before a stressful event can help to download them from mind, make them less likely to pop up in the moment. It's kind of like when you wake up in the middle of the night and you're really worried about what you have to do the next day. You're trying to think about everything you have to accomplish and you write it down and then you can go back to sleep. Journaling or getting those thoughts down on paper makes it less likely they'll pop up and distract you in the moment. The end result is that you can perform your best when it matters most.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
I can feel the blood creeping up from the heathens. Got will, got fight, got pride, got reason. If they wanna go eat, then you know I'm gon' feed them. If you're coming for me, hope you're ready for a demon. I got eyes in the back of my head, I'm seeing. Take me for granted and you know I'm leaving. I'ma take what's mine with the webs I'm weaving. I could take this crowd from seeing to